The union would like to mislead the workers, especially during the campaign, into believing that they'll always keep what they've got and go up from there. But the truth is that in collective bargaining, you can lose.
Collective bargaining is far from a sure bet for union-represented employees. In truth, it's much like playing the game Wheel of Fortune. When the wheel stops, you could wind up with more. You could end up with what you started with, or you could have less. It's all part of the union gamble. Collective bargaining is usually one of the most important issues during an organizing campaign. The union wants you to believe that if it wins the right to represent you in collective bargaining negotiations, you will automatically have increased pay and benefits, shorter hours, better working conditions, a greater say in how you do your job. In other words, whatever you've been told the union could get for you if you vote yes in the election. But this isn't the way collective bargaining works. The laws that control collective bargaining require both the union and the employer to sit down together and negotiate over pay, hours, and working conditions. This is the only right that a union is guaranteed if it wins a National Labor Relations Board election, the right to negotiate with an employer. During these negotiations, the union cannot win anything that isn't also agreeable to management. Union proposals that management believes are unfair, unreasonable, or harmful can be rejected. Employers have the right to make counterproposals and may legally offer lower pay, fewer benefits, and less favorable working conditions than there were before the election. The U.S. Supreme Court in one case stated, "It must be stressed that the duty to bargain collectively with a union does not carry with it the duty to reach an agreement." And the U.S. Court of Appeals found, just as surely as an employer may increase benefits in bargaining, he may take them away. Even after making every effort to reach agreement, management is not required to sign a union contract. Although the union may talk about making demands during negotiations, all it can really do is make proposals and counterproposals, which may or may not be acceptable to management. If the union has told you that your present pay, benefits, and working conditions are the starting point for negotiations and can only be bargained upward, this is also misleading. No one knows whether or not these things would improve if the union was voted in. After you've heard more about how collective bargaining really works, you'll see that it's not a blank check for the union, but it is one of the union's most popular and misunderstood campaign tactics when trying to win your vote.
Collective bargaining is a process of give and take. There are only so many slices of the pie. It's very difficult to try and explain that to members after you've created this wonderful picture of what you hope to do, and it's difficult when you can't deliver on those promises, because the reality is it's a give and take process. Sometimes you're doing a lot of trade-off in collective bargaining, and that's another thing that we don't talk about in an organizing campaign, but the reality is that you have to.
Even in the first contract you can lose. You can gain, or you might break even. You might gain a holiday, you might lose a holiday. You might gain vacation or sick leave, you may lose vacation and sick leave. And over the years, and sometimes it takes many, many, many years to get what the union organizer promised he was going to get on the very first day. I've seen it take 15 or 20 years to get anywhere close to what the union organizer promised.
And we were told to go out and tell everybody on every issue, bar none. If they got a problem, tell them we can negotiate that into the contract. Not a problem, we can negotiate that in the contract. Once again, never use will. I always say we can negotiate that in the contract. Every time someone come up to me and they'd say, well, you think the union can do anything about this? Yeah, we can negotiate that in the contract.
The union claims one of its greatest benefits for members is the right to have their interests represented at the bargaining table by professional negotiators. But organizers also claim that the union belongs to its members and is run by members. So who really does the union's bargaining? Paid professionals from the union or members? Who is the union really representing during negotiations? Members or itself?
Okay, the first negotiation session I attended was really shocking to me because they were campaigning that they would have a 5-member board of employees that would go to the table and bargain with management. When that is true, I was one of the 5. However, they have mine had 2 district representatives sit at the table, and they did all the negotiations. We just sat there. I got a list of 15 items that was issues of concern from the employees. I went around and collected them myself, talking to people, and because I was elected onto the negotiating team. And I came back and tried to initiate that into negotiations with my district representative who was at the negotiating table. And out of those 15, only 1 was brought up.
An official of the union is always the chief spokesperson at the bargaining table and does probably 98% of the talking at the bargaining table. The only reason that you take a committee in is just so that they can feel good and you can make yourself look good to the rest of the plant that, oh, we're taking some of your co-workers with us. We go in and put on a show for the workers to, jump up and down and scream and walk down the middle of the table and go out and slam the door and put on a show. But as a rule, the contract negotiations is done over the telephone or over dinner with the attorneys or the human resource directors, and you get an agreement, and then you go sell it to the workers by putting on a show.
I was elected to the contract negotiating committee and also the grievance committee by my fellow workers. And during the contract negotiations, it came down to the final days, and we the negotiating team that was elected by the membership, had what we felt was a very important issue that we needed to get contract language settled on. The district representative told me to drop that subject that had already been settled. And I said, well, how could this be? We haven't even discussed it with the company. And he said, well, I'm telling you it's settled. And he then informed me that he had settled the issue with the company negotiator. Therefore, I said, well, it seems to me then that we are basically just a bunch of figureheads here. And he said, if that's the word you want to use, then yes, I guess you're right.
There can be little doubt that during collective bargaining, the so-called professional negotiator is in charge of bargaining for the union side. Whether this is an organizer or some other official, their first objective is to guarantee that dues are collected from every union-represented employee. This is why virtually all collective bargaining agreements contain a dues checkoff provision that requires management to deduct dues from employees' paychecks and turn the money directly over to the union. In states where it's legal, unions also negotiate a union security provision into the contract. This forces all eligible employees to become and remain union members and pay dues or lose their jobs. This is a very important point that's often misunderstood during campaigns in states with right-to-work laws. Although it's true that employees in a right-to-work state can refuse union membership, they would still have to work under union job restrictions, seniority rules, and grievance procedures, just as if they were members. If a union can negotiate both dues checkoff and union security into a contract, it's sure of collecting dues from every employee and without the hassle of confronting people who are either dissatisfied with the union or who need the money for themselves. Without dues checkoff or union security provisions, it's very unlikely that a union would ever agree to a contract. To get these things, the professional negotiator sometimes bargains away part of the pay and benefits employees had before the union was voted in. Unions are willing to trade off some of what members already have in exchange for something that's only of value to the union. It happens.
The thing that upset me the most is the very first thing they wanted to negotiate was the international and the district to get what they call dues checkoff. That's where the company writes a check for the dues and sends it to the union instead of the union have to collect. And that's the first thing they bargained for. So that the district and the international wanted that, so we lost a holiday. We lost one of our holidays.
Well, the union's main objective, the officials of the union, is to get dues checkoff and union security. Protection for the stewards and the union officials. Dues checkoff is a card or a clause in the contract that says the union will present the employee with a card signed by the worker where the worker agrees to pay union dues taken from his or her check and presented to the union, usually on a monthly basis. And the union is not going to come out to the location where the workers are working with their hat in their hand trying to collect their money. They're not going to stay down at the union hall and hope the worker will bring the money down to the union hall. They're going to have a clause in the contract, and I've never seen a contract that did not have it. They're going to have a clause in the contract that says the employer will take it out of their paycheck and mail it to the union.
Our primary concern is that we get a union security clause. We've invested a lot of time and money in this organizing drive. We need to have a return on our investment. There's no benefit in us having members if they're not paying dues.
Like the union, management comes to the bargaining table with its own objectives. A company has to be profitable and competitive, especially in today's marketplace. It also needs to be flexible so it can respond to changing conditions. Management has the right to reject any union demands that are unreasonable and potentially harmful. This is the other side of collective bargaining, the side the union doesn't talk about. Union representation does not mean that the union makes business decisions for the company. Almost all union contracts have a section called management rights. Among other things, this section gives management the right to hire, fire, and lay off workers, the right to supervise the workforce and determine policies, to outsource or subcontract work, to set standards and production quotas, and to discipline, promote, or demote employees. Collective bargaining is a give-and-take proposition. To balance the union's right to ask for whatever it promised during a campaign, management has an equal say in negotiations. Nothing can change unless management agrees. This is why no one knows what the outcome of negotiations might be. Many who have voted to support a union have found that collective bargaining doesn't always bring the changes an organizer talked about. Collective bargaining is a gamble that may or may not turn out to your advantage. Many people who relied on the union to watch out for their interests during collective bargaining have found out who the union really represents in negotiations. Listen to some of their experiences working under union-negotiated contracts.
After the union came in, everybody was kind of excited at first because it was union. And as time goes by, they found out more that the union wasn't doing anything for them. It wasn't helping them. It wasn't protecting them like they thought it was going to protect them. People were getting fired. Union didn't help them. People were quitting, still working short. Union didn't help. No raises, no benefits, no nothing. They just got our money and that was it.
Yo me desilusioné mucho con la unión.
I was very disillusioned with the union when negotiations took place and when they weren't able to obtain anything advantageous to all of the people who had been paying their monthly dues for so many years, and I saw that they didn't do any good, nor did they get us anything.
The vacation that they proposed was worse than the one that we have now, really. As far as the union is concerned, after you work for the company a year, your annual evaluation, you only get, 10 or 15 cents. And I can't see where I can benefit from that. A whole year and I'm only worth 10 or 15 cents. I don't need it. I can negotiate for my own salary.
You're better off negotiating your own self, because somebody else from another town, which that's what unions did, they come in, They have no idea really what's going on. They don't know the people. And somebody trying to negotiate something for you, they don't know what's going on, and they won't get it.
There was a person that had 1 day seniority over me, which he never worked, drove a piece of equipment that I have been driving for the past 10 years. So what happens? I'm taken off. That man didn't have any training in that equipment, but they gave him the job. I was left out in the cold. They said, I will call you. But I still had to pay my union dues. So why should I need somebody that I have to pay to support me, my family, when they're not there when you need them? So I had to leave, start a new life. And I made one promise to myself. I don't want nothing to do with any union, because there's nothing but promises. They promise and promise, but they do not help you.
It's all about the union, what they want. It ain't what we want, it's what they want. They didn't come tell us nothing. It's what the union want. The union want this, the union want that. What about what we want? They supposed to speak for us. But I don't need nobody to speak for me if it's gonna come out like this.
I guess the worst abuse that I've ever seen of union power was a situation where there was 850-odd workers in a plant. And they sent the negotiating committee, including the secretary-treasurer, in to negotiate the contract. The secretary-treasurer brought the contract back and the workers voted it down. The workers sent him back in and they negotiated some more and brought it back. The workers voted it down again, and the secretary pulled his pencil out of his pocket, signed the contract, throwed it on the table, told 850 workers, live with it for the next 3 years, I'm out of here.
During an organizing campaign, the union may try to convince you that collective bargaining is the answer to all problems and complaints, and that professional union negotiators can get you more of whatever you want. But that's a very one-sided view of how bargaining works. In truth, collective bargaining is a two-way street. That's why it's called bargaining. All things proposed by the union must be agreed to by your employer. It's impossible to say whether or not the union would negotiate any improvements. The right to union representation does not imply a right to a better deal. That's a direct quote from the U.S. Court of Appeals about collective bargaining. It means a company doesn't automatically have to agree to whatever the union proposes. It also means that everything you currently have goes on the table and becomes part of the union's bargaining chips. Make no mistake, collective bargaining is a high-stakes union game that would be played with your future. Only when it's over would you know whether you've won, broken even, or lost.
I wouldn't want to go through an experience like that again, because basically you have no control over the outcome of the situation, and I would compare it to selling your soul to the devil.